Welcome to this explainer. I'm thrilled to be your guide today through a foundational masterclass on how we actually study the biology of the brain. Whether you're a hardcore biology nerd or just casually fascinated by why we do the things we do, this stuff literally teaches us the mechanics of who we are. We're looking straight at the interdisciplinary field of behavioral neuroscience. It's this beautiful, complex mashup of psychology, physiology, biology, chemistry, and even computer science, all coming together to teach us how the nervous system ultimately produces every single behavior we have. So let's dive right in with the ultimate philosophical puzzle, the big one that behavioral neuroscience teaches us how to investigate. How exactly does a 3-pound squishy lump of wet physical matter inside your skull actually generate your thoughts, your dreams, your entire personality, and that completely intangible mind of yours? I mean, it's basically the grandest mystery in science, and today we're going to break down exactly how researchers tackle it. Think of this as our syllabus for today. First, the science of behavior. Second, solving the mind-body question. Third, evolution of the brain. Fourth, modern levels of analysis. Fifth, ethics in neuroscience research. And finally, number 6, the ever-changing plastic brain. Okay, let's get into part 1, the science of behavior. Let's kick off our first lesson by looking at the 2 very distinct ways scientists explain all the crazy complex behaviors they observe out in the real world. When behavioral neuroscientists want to teach us about how we act, they generally use 2 main approaches: generalization and reduction. Now, generalization, that's all about the big picture. If we see a specific brain chemical causing aggression in, say, mice, monkeys, and humans, we can confidently declare a broad rule about that chemical across all mammals. But then we have reduction. This is where scientists zoom way in to explain a complex action, like walking, by looking at the tiny elementary processes. We're talking the chemical communications between individual muscle cells. The big takeaway here is that to truly understand behavior, researchers have to seamlessly bounce back and forth between these micro and macro perspectives. It's a constant balancing act. Moving right along to part 2, solving the mind-body question. You know, before this was a hard biological science, studying behavior was deeply rooted in philosophy. For literally centuries, humanity debated the relationship between the physical body and the mind. Back in the 17th century, the philosopher René Descartes famously championed dualism. He basically believed the physical body was just a machine, but the mind, or the soul, was entirely non-physical and separate. He thought they interacted through this tiny little structure in the brain called the pineal gland. On the flip side, we have monism, or materialism. This is the belief that only matter and energy exist in the universe. And the crucial point here, modern neuroscience is firmly on team monism. They operate on the absolute belief that the mind is simply a physical phenomenon produced by the workings of the nervous system. Basically, if we unlock the physical brain, we unlock the mind. Simple as that. Now, this realization definitely didn't happen overnight. Back in the ancient era, brilliant folks like Aristotle actually taught that the heart was the seat of thought. And the brain? Well, the brain was just a fancy radiator there to cool down the heart's passions. Hippocrates totally disagreed with that, pointing straight to the brain. Then, during the Roman Empire, Galen started dissecting animal brains and physically proved that nerves connect directly to the brain. That pretty much ended Aristotle's heart-centered theory right there. Fast forward to the 19th century, and boom, the true foundation of modern neuroscience is born. We discover that nerves act like one-way wires, we figure out that different parts of the brain control specific localized functions, and, crucially, we finally discover the neuron, the ultimate building block of the brain. Which brings us to part 3, evolution of the brain. To really wrap our heads around why our modern brains are built the way they are today, we have to look to the principles of evolution. Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection isn't just about the shape of a bird's beak. It applies entirely to the brain, too. Traits that give a selective advantage for survival get passed on. Because of this, behavioral neuroscience is heavily guided by a concept called functionalism. This just means that when we teach and study biological phenomena, we do it by figuring out their useful survival functions for the organism. We don't just ask how a behavior happens, we ask why. Why did this specific behavior provide a survival advantage to our ancient ancestors? And what's super fascinating here is how incredibly relatable, everyday physical traits directly demanded a larger, way more complex primate brain. Think about it. Having agile hands for tool use. That requires massive neural coordination. Developing color vision so you can spot ripe fruit or a hidden predator. That requires advanced sensory processing. Even just standing upright, bipedalism. Sure, it freed our hands, but it also required completely new balance and navigation circuits in the brain. And then there are the social traits. Things like linguistic abilities to teach and share collective knowledge. There's even this thing called the social brain hypothesis, which suggests our massive cortex evolved specifically to manage the incredibly complex relationships within our tribes. Basically, our brains grew massive because our survival absolutely demanded it. All right, let's look at part 4, modern levels of analysis. So, with all that massive evolutionary history in mind, how do we actually research these giant concepts in a modern lab? Well, researchers investigate the brain across 5 distinct levels of analysis. It's kind of like zooming a camera lens out. We start all the way down at the molecular level, studying the exact chemicals that make a single neuron function. Zoom out a bit to the cellular level, and we look at how those individual neurons wire together. Zoom out again to the systems level to look at broad circuits, like your entire visual system. Zoom out even further to the behavioral level to explore how those systems combine to actually produce something like a mood or a memory. And finally, the cognitive level, the absolute highest level where we try to understand the neuromechanisms for abstract things like imagination, language, and self-awareness. It literally takes experts at all 5 of these levels working together to piece the full puzzle together. Next up, part 5, ethics and neuroscience research. With all this immense investigative power comes some very strict responsibility. Because most of our foundational knowledge of the nervous system comes from animal studies, scientists are taught from day one to strictly follow what are known as the 3 R's. This ensures humane, responsible oversight. First, replacement. This means always seeking non-animal computer models whenever possible. Next, reduction, using the absolute minimum number of animals necessary to get a valid scientific result. And finally, refinement, constantly improving welfare and minimizing any distress. Absolutely no research happens without intense scrutiny and approval from an oversight body called the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, or IACUC. But what about when we study human subjects to understand health and disease? Well, there are incredibly strict, non-negotiable protocols for us too. The biggest one is informed consent. A researcher can't just run tests on you willy-nilly. They must explicitly teach you about the exact nature of the study, how your data will be collected, and any potential costs or benefits before you even think about agreeing to participate. And overseeing all of this is the Institutional Review Board, the IRB. They act as this powerful watchdog to ensure completely ethical treatment and to vigorously protect the identities of all volunteers. But you know, ethics isn't just about physical safety anymore. It's getting into the very nature of mind reading. As our technological tools get sharper and sharper, we've seen the rise of a whole new field, neuroethics. This dedicated field helps scientists and society navigate the really complex, murky moral implications of peering directly into the human mind. Think about it. If a brain scan can suddenly reveal your subconscious biases, or if a neural implant can literally alter your mood, well, who owns that data? Who sets the boundaries? Neuroethics ensures we ask these hard questions right now, before the technology completely outpaces our morality. And that brings us to our final section, Part 6, the ever-changing plastic brain. For our final lesson, we're looking at the very cells that are allowing you to watch, listen, and comprehend this explainer right at this exact moment. When you look at the fundamental biology of the brain, you really just need to know about 2 main players. First, we have neurons. These are the absolute stars of the show. They're responsible for the actual information processing and all the electrical communication happening in the brain. But while neurons get all the glory, they are surprisingly delicate and needy. They literally couldn't survive without our second player, the glia. Glial cells are the unsung heroes here. They provide vital structural support, deliver nourishment, and insulate the neurons so their electrical signals fire perfectly. It's the ultimate biological partnership. But honestly, the most empowering thing behavioral neuroscience teaches us is this concept of neuroplasticity. See, for a long, long time, people thought the adult brain was basically a fixed, rigid computer. They thought that once you grew up, your brain's hardware was just set in stone. Well, we now know that is entirely false. Your brain is a dynamic, highly plastic organ that is biologically wired to change, adapt, and be physically remodeled by your experiences and your learning throughout your entire life. It even includes neurogenesis, which is the actual production of brand new neurons even in adult brains. Let that sink in. Every single time you learn something new, including watching this very explainer, you are physically rewiring your own brain. So as we wrap up this foundational masterclass on behavioral neuroscience, I want you to consider this. Knowing that your actions, your learning, and your experiences literally reshape the physical structure of your mind, what new neural pathways will you teach your brain to build today? The power to change your mind is quite literally in your head. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.